The story begins with amidst a chaotic scene. A man with a commanding presence demands to know the whereabouts of Avril, his voice slicing through the tension of the room. Another man, seemingly baffled by the intrusion, questions the stranger's identity, asking who the hell he thinks he is. The intruder, Lord Dillon, retorts with incredulity, questioning if the other man truly thought he would fail to recognize the face of his own beloved wife. He describes her features with possessive adoration, noting her blossom-pink hair and blue eyes, asserting that they clearly belong to the Avril that the other man claims to love. The woman in question, Avril herself, stammers in confusion, affirming her identity while looking upon Lord Dillon with a mixture of shock and recognition. The narrative shifts backward in time to explain how this wicked woman came to be married. Avril stands before a door, peering through the crack at a magnificent wedding dress, realizing with a heavy heart that it is the very gown Dillon had commissioned for their wedding. Her mind reels, trying to comprehend how time seems to have rewound 1 year, questioning the mechanics of her current reality. She acknowledges the loveliness of the dress but chastises herself for admiring it, recalling that she allowed it to be stolen by her sister, Karina. She steels herself, forcing her focus back to the present situation, reminding herself that the gift was originally meant for her. In a lavish drawing room, Avril confronts her family. Her father, a portly man with a mustache, declares that Avril will marry in Karina's place, a statement that hangs heavy in the air. Avril, appalled, calls the suggestion vulgar, only to be immediately reprimanded by her stepmother to watch her mouth. Avril clarifies the situation, asking if they truly intend to offer her up as a sacrifice to pay off Karina's accumulated debts. Her stepmother and Karina stand together, the stepmother looking imperious and Karina feigning innocence. Avril reflects internally that while misfortune is a daily occurrence for her, this specific demand feels excessive. The narrative exposes the root of the issue. Karina has cultivated a reputation as a wicked woman by using Avril's name. Karina frequently sneaks out at night to play, and during a recent escapade at a masquerade ball, she became friendly with the son of a marquis, spending the night with him. Karina returned home the following morning, leaving a trail of scandal in her wake. The fallout from this indiscretion was swift. The family was told emphatically to repay all conflicts and debts immediately. Karina, acting the victim, claims she didn't realize the marquis's son had a fiancé, while Avril points out the moral bankruptcy of the situation. The solution to this scandal involves a substitute. The proposed groom is the son of a millionaire who had previously loaned the family money, but since the boy's fiancé was the one aggrieved, the arrangement shifts. Karina smilingly asserts that it is all fine because they have a substitute who can repent in her place, claiming that everyone makes mistakes. Avril, however, pierces through the charade, pointing out that Karina is hardly a night owl, and questioning who would believe such a story given Karina's public image as lovely and smart. Karina reveals the linchpin of her deception. She gave the name Avril Allingham during her tryst. Avril vehemently denies ever attending the masquerade, but the damage is done. She has been framed as the wicked sister. The family patriarch reveals the true depth of the plan. Avril asks what this means for her, and her father bluntly states she is to pay off the debt she incurred by marrying His Excellency, the Duke of Lancaster. He describes the Duke as a horny old duke who lives on the frontier, a man of mystery rarely seen in social circles. When Avril attempts to speak, she is silenced aggressively by her father. Avril realizes she is not only being used as a substitute but has also been effectively labeled a bad girl to fit the narrative. Rumors swirl about the Duke. He is an old man, and the Lancaster family is prestigious with royal connections. The gossip suggests the Duke is planning to gift a large sum of money to his second wife, implying that even a wicked woman like Avril is acceptable merchandise for him. Avril resigns herself to the fact that she is being sold to the Duke's family in Karina's stead. Karina, dropping her facade, leans in close to Avril and whispers that she disgusts her. She mocks Avril's eidetic memory, calling the ability to memorize anything in a single sitting creepy and a curse. Karina asks if Avril knows what people say about her, to which Avril submissively replies, "Yes, sister." Karina cruelly notes that despite this genius ability, Avril is incompetent and urges her to leave the house immediately. Avril leaves the room, the door clicking shut behind her. Instead of despair, she feels a surge of overwhelming relief and joy, realizing the day has finally come where she can leave this house. She reflects on her past. Born 18 years ago as the eldest child of the Earl of Allingham, she was once beloved by her parents and lived a happy life until her mother suddenly passed away when she was 5. Everything changed when her father remarried. She was introduced to her new mother and sister, Karina. People often pitted her because she and Karina looked alike and were the same age, revealing the painful truth that her father had been cheating on her mother for years to produce Karina. Avril's special ability manifested early. A tutor once praised her as a genius for sight-reading music and playing it perfectly after one night, as well as reciting books word for word after a single reading. However, this praise led to the tutor being fired. Avril recounts how she was forbidden from seeing her grandmother after her father's remarriage because the grandmother never accepted the new wife and Corina. Avril believes she inherited this memory ability from her grandmother, which explains why her stepmother despises it. Following her mother's and grandmother's deaths, their assets were sold, leaving Avril with no mementos. Her grandmother had offered to take her in, but her parents refused to maintain appearances. From that point on, Avril was treated like a servant, scolded for incompetence while she maintained the household. She found solace in the work, enjoying cleaning, repairing the servants' hallway, tending to fireplaces, and shoveling snow. She worries about the state of the house if she leaves, particularly the study where she managed the paperwork for her father. When she raises this concern to her father, warning him that the house will fall into disrepair and lose income without her management, he scoffs. He dismissively tells her he will hire someone from the academy who is more talented than she is to handle the work. He bans her from the study and declares she is no longer a member of the family, warning her never to return if she gets kicked out by the Duke. Avril accepts her expulsion but worries about the servants. She reflects on how her father prioritizes the happiness of her stepmother and Corina over the estate's stability. She knows the family finances are in ruins because her father neglects the fiefdom, and she realizes the money from her marriage will be used to pay for her replacement and the family's debts. She laments that she cannot organize the documents in the study before she leaves to help the next person. Outside, Avril says goodbye to the tearful maid, Kira. Kira is devastated, but Avril comforts her, admitting she is actually happy her wish to leave has come true. Avril gives Kira instructions. There are papers hidden in her closet that explain the estate's situation. She tells Kira to use them if the butler or the people of the territory fall into trouble, and instructs Kira to write to her if she needs help. Avril acknowledges the house may soon cease to exist due to financial ruin. Kira expresses her love for Avril, and they part ways. As Avril prepares to depart, her stepmother demands that Avril send the marriage money immediately upon receipt. Avril enters the carriage, her expression hardening as she listens to the horse's hooves. She realizes she isn't angry, but she acknowledges her stepmother is a horrid person. She decides that while she would have sent the money for the sake of the territory, she knows it would only be squandered on luxuries for her stepmother and Corina. Consequently, she resolves not to send them a single coin. During the journey, Avril wonders about their location, knowing the Duke's territory is on the southern frontier. However, when the carriage stops, she is shocked to see a bustling, massive city. It looks like the royal capital, confusing her greatly. Corina's handmaiden, Carol, who has accompanied her, reveals that Corina lied about the destination being rural to prevent Avril from making a fuss about wanting to go to the capital. Carol mocks Avril, saying her head is too full of flowers, and that she has no idea what she will face once married. Avril realizes Carol was sent to harass her and report back to Corina, but she feels a twinge of pity for the maid. Avril decides it doesn't matter. Freedom is finally within her grasp regardless of the location. The carriage arrives at a beautiful estate that resembles a castle. A maid greets her with a scowl, addressing her as Lady Avril Allingham, but clearly unwelcoming. Avril senses the hostility, understanding that the servants view her as the wicked woman who ruined her own family and is now being bought by their master. They view the Duke as odd for willing to pay such a large amount for a woman with her reputation. Despite the cold reception, Avril marvels at the cleanliness of the foyer, her mind immediately jumping to how one would mop the sparkling marble floors. A voice interrupts her thoughts, apologizing for keeping her waiting. Avril turns to see a handsome young man, not the old toad she expected. She stares, taken aback by his appearance. He questions if she thinks he is the Duke, and she stammers an apology for her rudeness. She explains that she heard the duchy was a southern frontier land and that the family avoided society, rumors that the young Duke confirms as generally true to save face. He notes her reputation for bad behavior but seems amused rather than judgmental. Avril introduces herself properly, curtsying and thanking him. She references a Miss Hannah, likely a tutor who sympathized with her and taught her etiquette in secret after her mother fired her official tutors. The Duke, Dylan, invites her to a discussion. As they sit, he asks why she thought he was the previous Duke. Avril explains her assumption based on the rumors of the previous Duke's retirement not being public knowledge. Dylan seems relieved that she is sociable, contrary to the rumors of her being difficult. Avril admits she just happens to know things, downplaying her perfect memory. Internally, Avril is disappointed. She had hoped for an elderly husband so she could eventually be left alone or widowed to live a carefree life in the country. She prefers the quiet of the frontier to the capital and is used to dealing with lustful older men because of her father. She worries that if the rumors about his hobbies are true, she might have to flee. Dylan cuts to the chase, initiating the discussion about their marriage. He declares that this will be a contract marriage. He outlines the terms. They will be a couple in appearance only and will divorce after 3 years. He presents the contract, stating he will provide more than enough alimony for her to live happily after the divorce, after which she may do as she pleases. Avril reads the contract, her eyes widening. To Dylan's surprise, she does not object but beams with pure joy, declaring the arrangement amazing. She gladly accepts the contract marriage, thanking him profusely, leaving the Duke bewildered by her enthusiastic reaction. Avril Allingham reclines in the ornate chair, her hand resting delicately against her cheek as she regards the man across from her with a beatific, almost triumphant smile. She listens to the Duke's hesitation, his voice laced with concern as he questions why she appears so unbothered by the harsh terms laid out between them. He scrutinizes her reaction, expecting distress over the clause that stipulates her eviction in 3 years, a condition that would brand any noblewoman as damaged goods in the eyes of society. Yet, Avril's expression remains bright, her eyes sparkling with an uncanny confidence as she points out that he must have anticipated this exact scenario when he drafted the document. She leans forward slightly, her demeanor completely at odds with the gravity of her impending social ruin. The young woman clasps her hands together against her chest, her face flushing with genuine joy as she declares the Duke to be one of the most upstanding individuals she has ever had the pleasure of meeting. Internally, her mind races with the thrill of the arrangement. The prospect of receiving a substantial sum of money coupled with absolute freedom in a mere 3 years feels less like a punishment and more like a salvation. The Duke watches her, his brow furrowed in sheer bewilderment, unable to reconcile her enthusiastic praise with the humiliating nature of the contract. Catching herself, Avril quickly dampens her excitement, realizing her outburst might be perceived as madness. She hastily excuses her words as a bad habit of speaking without thinking, bowing her head slightly in a performance of demure embarrassment, though the Duke remains skeptical of her sudden shift in tone. They return their attention to the papers on the table, the Duke granting her permission to read the terms aloud to ensure clarity. Avril lifts the document, her voice steady as she recites the first article. Despite the legal validity of their union, they will remain husband and wife in name only, a formality that requires only the submission of a marriage license to satisfy official records. She moves seamlessly to the second article, which demands her full cooperation in maintaining the dignity of the Lancaster Duchy. Avril accepts this condition immediately, nodding with a breezy, carefree attitude that suggests she finds the requirement trivial. The Duke interrupts her reading to clarify the practical implications of the second clause. He stares at the floor, his expression serious, explaining that while she must play the part of a duchess in public, she is otherwise free to conduct herself however she pleases. Avril pauses, lowering the paper as she processes the immense liberty he is offering. She seeks confirmation, asking if this truly means she is absolved of all wifely duties beyond the public performance. The Duke confirms this with a curt nod, stating the text means exactly what it says. However, his demeanor hardens slightly as he adds a stipulation. For the duration of the 3-year contract, she must refrain from any behavior that could drag the duchy into legal entanglements. He continues to the third article, which mandates separate bedrooms and a strict policy of non-interference in each other's private activities. He looks at her with a detached, almost bored expression, explicitly stating that he has no interest in her proclivities, a word that causes Avril to blink in confusion. She tilts her head, genuinely puzzled by the insinuation that she possesses specific, troublesome habits. Seeing her lack of understanding, the Duke sighs, rubbing the bridge of his nose in exhaustion as he bluntly cites the masquerade ball as an example of the conduct he expects her to curb. Avril stiffens, realizing instantly that he subscribes to the rumors surrounding her alleged indiscretions. He believes she spent the night with an engaged man, a misunderstanding she decides not to correct. She observes his indifference, noting that he doesn't seem angry, merely practical, which emboldens her to accept the premise without defense. The narration of the contract concludes with the final terms. The wedding will proceed when appropriate with mutual cooperation, and upon the contract's expiration in 3 years, the Duke will pay his ex-wife a substantial alimony. Avril stares at the paper, her body trembling not with fear, but with the realization that the terms are suspiciously advantageous. She voices a tentative concern, wondering if this is too convenient for her. The Duke, misinterpreting her hesitation as a critique of the harshness, defends the contract. He argues that simply using her for marriage and then discarding her without compensation. The Duke, misinterpreting her hesitation as a critique of the harshness, defends the contract. He argues that simply using her for marriage and then discarding her without compensation would be cruel, revealing a surprising layer of conscience beneath his cold exterior. Avril looks at him, struck by the thought that he is actually a very good person. They lock eyes for a moment, a silent exchange passing between them where Avril realizes she wants to say the exact same thing to him regarding his kindness, while the Duke remains utterly baffled by the workings of her mind. Fearing he might change his mind if she lingers too long, Avril grabs the pen and signs the document with decisive speed. The sound of the quill scratching against the paper seals her fate, securing her a life of comfort in a mansion where she can do as she pleases, followed by a future of financial independence. The deal is done. With the formalities concluded, the Duke leans back, his curiosity getting the better of him. He admits that he chose her precisely because of her history of bad behavior, but he feels compelled to ask one final question. He looks at her intensely, asking if she agreed to marry the wicked woman Avril Allingham, persona specifically because she planned to divorce him later anyway. Avril is taken aback by the directness of the question, her eyes widening. Recovering quickly, she adopts a pragmatic stance, explaining that since she is already known as a villainess, becoming a former duchess cannot possibly damage her reputation further. In fact, she argues, the title might even open new avenues for her in the future. The Duke stares at her, stunned by her calculating honesty, and dryly remarks that she has absolutely no concept of tact. He sighs, resigning himself to her logic and telling her he doesn't mind if she chooses to view the situation that way. Later, Avril stands in the center of her new living quarters, overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding her. She had expected a modest room, perhaps a servant's quarter given her temporary status, but instead, she finds herself in a luxurious suite that rivals a palace. A maid stands by the door, confirming that this is indeed Lady Avril's room. Avril scans the space, her internal monologue panic-stricken as she takes in the polished marble walls and a massive vase that looks expensive enough to consume her entire alimony if she were to accidentally break it. She eyes the pristine carpet, terrified of walking on it with muddy shoes. The maid, observing Avril's stunned reaction, assumes the new mistress is simply assessing the accommodations and comments that Avril must be accustomed to such luxury. Avril snaps to attention, forcing a strained smile as she lies, agreeing that she is definitely used to this sort of thing, desperate to maintain her noble facade. The maid explains that this building is a historic annex of the ducal family, hence the grandeur. Avril clenches her fists, steeling her resolve. She decides then and there that she must fully commit to the role of Avril the Wicked Woman. She reasons that the contract is predicated on her bad reputation. If the Duke were to discover she is not actually a villainess, he might consider the deal void. She thinks of Kira and the other servants she left behind, realizing she needs the alimony money to survive on her own and support them after the 3 years are up. She cannot go back to the Allingham County, so she must play this part perfectly. Turning to the maid with renewed determination, Avril tries to change the subject to avoid further scrutiny, commenting on the dreamlike quality of the annex. The maid, with a neutral expression, informs her that the master has granted Avril permission to use the annex however she likes. Avril nods, but the maid continues, revealing the darker history of the building. She explains that the former Duke typically lived at the main duchy, while his mistresses were usually housed here in the annex. Avril pieces the information together, realizing that the horny old Duke nickname attached to her new husband is actually a legacy of the previous head of the Lancaster family. The maid confirms this, noting that the reputation has unfairly stuck to the current Duke. However, the maid's tone shifts, becoming icy and stern. She bows slightly, but her eyes are sharp as she delivers a warning on behalf of the staff. They have no intention of meddling in Avril's personal life, but they would prefer she not parade her playdates around in front of the master. The maid instructs Avril to refrain from inviting men over to play, as much as possible, or at the very least, to only do so when her husband is absent. Avril stares at the maid, stunned by the intensity of the assumption. She feels the weight of the wicked woman reputation crashing down on her, wondering if it is even physically possible for her to live up to the scandalous expectations set by the maid's warning. She realizes that in this house, inviting men over is considered a standard expectation for her character. Chris Bronte, the aide to the Duke of Lancaster, stands in the dim light of the study, his brow furrowed in deep perplexity as he reviews the documents in his hand. He finds the situation entirely incomprehensible, unable to reconcile the data before him with the reality he has just witnessed. He remarks to his superior that, no matter how one analyzes the circumstances, the entire affair is undeniably strange. He notes that Lord Dillon himself appears to be quite different from the unsavory rumors that circulate about him, suggesting a pattern of misinformation that permeates the entire household. However, his primary confusion centers on their new guest. He admits that she was quite different from what she was rumored to be, her actual demeanor clashing violently with her reputation. He turns to the Duke, asking with genuine concern if there is something mentally or physically wrong with her to explain such a disparity. The Duke, Dillon, sits calmly at his desk, his fingers interlaced as he addresses his aide's confusion. He reveals a strategic manipulation of the truth, explaining that they deliberately spread those negative rumors about himself so that he wouldn't be bothered with an endless stream of marriage proposals. This admission clarifies the aide's earlier observation about Dillon, but the mystery of the lady remains. Chris Bronte presses the issue, pointing out that according to the rumors surrounding Lady Avril, she is supposed to be very badly behaved, a woman of low character and poor breeding. He gestures emphatically at the papers, noting that in person, however, she carried herself like an educated, well-mannered noblewoman, displaying a grace that completely contradicts the intelligence reports. Chris taps the document with his index finger, insisting that the problem lies specifically with Lady Avril herself. His suspicion grows as he formulates a theory, suggesting to the Duke that he feels she may have ulterior motives for wanting this marriage, perhaps playing a role to infiltrate the household. Dylan acknowledges the possibility with a non-committal murmur but counters with a pragmatic question. He asks Chris if, given her pleasant behavior, he believes they will be able to spend the next 3 years together without trouble. Chris softens, bowing his head slightly as he admits he is glad to hear that a peaceful coexistence is possible. Dylan continues, revealing that despite the rumors, there were no concerns raised about how quickly he wanted to be wed. He explains that he asked the Count for her hand in marriage only a few days ago, implying the process was rushed but unimpeded. Chris returns his attention to the background check dossier, reading aloud the specific details that paint such a damning picture of their new mistress. He notes her physical description first. She has rose gold hair and blue eyes. However, the report on Lady Avril Allingham quickly turns dark. According to their background check, she is a woman who enjoys messing with the relationships of those around her, deriving pleasure from emotional chaos. The list of her transgressions is extensive and specific. Item number 2 claims she has had premarital sex and has been involved in multiple affairs, casting her as a woman of loose morals. Chris corrects himself, clarifying that she has allegedly hooked up with multiple men. The dossier continues with item number 1, stating she is known for causing trouble at the masquerade ball, a high society event where decorum is paramount. Furthermore, the report claims she was kicked out of her home after racking up a large amount of debt, painting her as financially irresponsible. The narrative within the file suggests that unfortunately for her, this time, her lover's fiancé found out about their affair, leading to her social exile. Finally, item number 3 describes her as a vicious woman who is harsh with her servants, a trait that would typically make her a nightmare for the staff of the Lancaster house. Dylan listens to this litany of sins with a serene expression, his eyes closed in thought. He muses aloud that she seemed very different when he met her, almost as though she were someone else entirely. He wonders idly if she perhaps has a twin, seeking a logical explanation for the discrepancy between the trash described in the file and the woman he met. Chris laughs off the suggestion, informing the Duke that he is told she does have a sister, but they are certainly not twins. The 8 chuckles at the absurdity of the idea. Dylan sighs, a sound of resignation mixed with strategy. He explains that based on their research, he assumed she would resent the humiliating nature of the contract he forced upon her. He admits that he gave her such a cordial welcome and granted her use of the luxurious annex specifically to keep her quiet and placate her expected anger. Chris smiles brightly, a realization dawning on him. He concludes that Lord Dylan was simply being kind, misinterpreting the Duke's strategic maneuvering as genuine benevolence. Dylan cuts him off sharply, telling him to be quiet and stating that kindness was not the point of his actions. He instructs Chris to keep him informed of anything that concerns him regarding the new arrangement. Specifically, he asks his aide to keep a close eye on Lady Avril's behavior, needing to know if the wicked woman from the reports will eventually surface. He assures Chris that if there are any problems, he will help out however he can. Chris bows formally, accepting the order with a promise to obey His Excellency's wishes. The scene shifts to the following morning in the annex. Sunlight streams through the large windows, illuminating a breakfast table set for one. A maid announces that breakfast is served for Lady Avril. The spread on the table, however, is an insult disguised as a meal. The plate features a croissant that looks dry and hard, labeled as stale bread. Beside it lie broccoli and other greens that have lost their color, clearly overcooked vegetables. A bowl of corn soup sits nearby, no steam rising from it, indicating it is completely cold. The salad is composed of withered vegetables that have lost their crunch. The main dish, an omelette, is slightly burned on the edges. To top it off, a whole, fuzzy kiwi sits in a bowl, completely unpeeled. Despite this dismal offering, Avril clasps her hands together, her eyes sparkling with genuine delight as she exclaims what a luxurious breakfast it is. She is breathless with wonder, completely missing the insult intended by the kitchen staff. She picks up the spoon and tastes the soup. She notes internally that it is a thick, cold soup, yet her reaction is not one of disgust. She takes a bite of the croissant, the sound of the hard crust crunching loudly in the quiet room. She acknowledges that it is a bit hard and was likely toasted, but she cheerfully tells herself that is just how she likes it. As she chews the dry bread, Avril reflects on her past. She recalls being told that her taste in food is a little unusual. She declares the meal delicious, her mind drifting back to the reason for her low standards. In a flashback, she remembers being given cold leftovers, which she would be forced to finish alone. Since she was young, she had only ever eaten after everyone else was finished, meaning she has rarely ever been able to eat hot food. The flashback reveals a pattern of systematic neglect. For some reason, she was always told to take care of a chore right before the meal was served, ensuring she missed the fresh food. Avril remembers eating with Carol and the other maids, finding comfort in their company even as she was relegated to their status. Because she started being treated like a servant in her own home, this meal before her now feels like a feast for a special occasion. She looks at the breakfast in front of her with gratitude, marveling at the abundance. She cuts into the slightly burned omelette and is amazed to find there is so much filling inside. She is genuinely impressed, contrasting this with her past where her meal was always made last, presumably with whatever scraps remained. To her, an omelette with all the fixings is a rare treat. She eats with gusto, thinking that it is like a party in her mouth. She reasons that of course good food is going to be delicious, but her gratitude extends beyond just the taste. She internally thanks His Excellency, feeling truly grateful to have such a meal in such a lovely place. Even the stale bread is very tasty to her deprivation-honed palate. Avril's thoughts turn to the staff. She realizes she hasn't seen Carol since yesterday. She speculates that perhaps Carol is working in the main house, reasoning that it is more important for the maid to develop a relationship with the servants there than with her. She silently wishes Carol a good life in her new home. Snapping back to the present, she addresses the maid standing stoically in the corner. She calls out to her, asking for her attention. The maid responds with a curt, yes. Avril explains that since this maid will be taking care of her from now on instead of working in the main house, she would like to know how to address her. She politely asks for the maid's name. The maid seems surprised by the direct engagement but answers that her name is Grace. Avril smiles warmly, telling Grace that breakfast was delicious today. Grace blinks, her expression blank, clearly confused by the compliment given the quality of the food. Avril continues, trying to build a rapport. She points out that Grace works for the Duke, implying a level of competence. Then, Avril makes a leap of logic that baffles the maid. She asks how Grace knew she loved hard bread. Grace stares at her in silence, her mind reeling, letting out a confused, huh. Avril misinterprets the silence as modesty. She thanks Grace very much, stating she is very glad to have someone like her by her side. Avril assumes that, of course, a maid of this caliber would familiarize herself with her guests' preferences. Grace, completely thrown off by this interpretation of her passive-aggressive service, stammers a confused, no. What? Avril finishes her thought, believing Grace researched her guests' preferences in advance. Avril then turns her attention to the final item on the table. She notices there is even fruit for dessert, looking at the fuzzy, unpeeled kiwi in the bowl. She thinks this is incredibly luxurious and feels she really deserves the praise she just gave Grace. She picks up the kiwi and the table knife, commenting on how sweet the gesture is. However, as she tries to peel the fuzzy skin with the dull dinner knife, the fruit slips and slides, making a clattering sound against the plate. The fruit is slippery, and Avril struggles to get a grip on it. As she fights with the kiwi, a sudden realization jolts her. She pauses, the knife hovering over the mangled fruit. She remembers her mission. She is supposed to be acting like a villainess. She wonders if she did something wrong by being so gracious and complimentary earlier. A panic sets in. She realizes she must behave like a wicked woman would, or else she risks being kicked out of the house for breaking the character outlined in her contract. She stiffens her posture, adopting a serious expression. She decides she must issue a harsh reprimand to correct her earlier kindness. She looks at the unpeeled fruit and decides this is the perfect opportunity. She recalls that she has been on the receiving end of Karina's jabs all her life, so she has a lot of experience with this sort of thing. She recognizes the unpeeled fruit as a form of bullying, noting that it is a more advanced technique to do it when no one else is around, subtle and deniable. Avril channels her inner villainess, or what she thinks one sounds like. She demands to know the meaning of this dessert. Grace, who was just recovering from the confusion of the bread compliment, looks at her warily. Avril slams the knife down, the clink echoing in the tension. She huffs, feigning outrage. She exclaims that she can't believe Grace didn't have a chef's knife ready, complaining that the fruit was a bit hard to peel with the provided cutlery. In an attempt to sound haughty, Avril declares that at home, fruit is served with the skin already peeled. Grace looks at her with wide eyes, completely bewildered by the sudden shift from gratitude to complaint, wondering what on earth she is talking about. Avril stammers slightly, her confidence wavering as she sees the maid's reaction. She begins to panic, wondering if she made a mistake in her choice of complaint. Grace lets out a sharp sigh, her demeanor shifting from confusion to cold professionalism. She bows apologetically, stating that she was mistaken. However, her apology is laced with sarcasm as she suggests that perhaps in the capital, fruit is typically peeled with a butter knife, mocking Avril's struggle. Avril shrinks back, realizing her attempt at being a demanding noblewoman has backfired. Grace abruptly turns and slams the door as she exits the room, shouting over her shoulder that tea will be served after the meal. Avril sits alone at the table, a sigh escaping her lips. Some time passes, and the atmosphere in the room settles. Grace eventually returns with the tea service. The maid pours the tea with a neutral expression, the steam rising from the cup indicating it is freshly brewed. Avril takes a sip and is surprised to find it delicious. She notes that today, the tea is steaming hot, a stark contrast to the cold soup. She realizes that the tea Grace served her upon returning was unlike the tepid, bitter brew she made yesterday. As she sips the warm beverage, Avril reflects on the morning's events, concluding that being a villainess is far more difficult than she thought. Sitting within the confines of a sunlit room, the Duke of Lancaster, Dylan, briefs his contract wife, Avril, regarding an upcoming social obligation. He explains that the event in question is a daytime garden party, a distinct departure from the evening soirees she might be accustomed to attending. With a stoic demeanor, he presses his hands together, emphasizing the necessity of her appearance. Because the schedule does not permit the luxury of commissioning a custom-made garment, he instructs her to venture into town and purchase a ready-made dress. He clarifies that the attire must be something suitable for the Duchess of Lancaster, upholding the dignity of her station. Avril accepts the command with a graceful bow, assuring him that he can leave the matter entirely in her hands. As she prepares to depart, her mind immediately begins to strategize the logistics of the task. First, she resolves to research the tea party's specific venue and the list of attendees. Only after understanding the social battlefield will she select an outfit that best suits the occasion. She recalls the specific terms of her engagement, reciting the clause that compels her to cooperate with the Duke's efforts to maintain the dignity of the Lancaster Duchy, just as the contract stipulated. However, her internal monologue reveals a secondary, more clandestine objective. While her maids bustle about with a checklist of attendees and party preparations, a task Avril notes was always her job back at her previous home, she pivots her strategy toward her role-playing persona. She determines that it is only right for her to choose a dress befitting a villainess, as she is currently enacting the role of the wicked woman Avril. She envisions herself as the model villainess, distinct from the innocent Corina, and steels herself for the performance. Before she sets out, a young man with messy hair and a servant's attire steps forward to introduce himself. He announces that he is Chris and that he will accompany Lady Avril on her excursion. Avril, somewhat taken aback by his sudden appearance, stammers his name. Chris places a hand on his chest and bows professionally, stating that whether it involves carrying her bags or acting as her butler, he is entirely at her service. Avril, flustered, accepts his help, noting that having him hold her bags is only natural. Meanwhile, Dylan observes from the background, and Avril internally reaffirms her commitment to acting like a true villainess during this outing. She decides to go shopping with Carol, reasoning that the maid knows Corina's tastes best, which will be essential for her calculated wardrobe choices. Upon arriving at the capital's dress shop, the atmosphere shifts to one of high fashion and commerce. A maid presents a dark, elegant dress to Avril, who stares at it with wide eyes. She questions Carol, asking if this is truly the kind of dress that Corina prefers. The dress in question is sophisticated, but Avril's internal criteria are specific. She reminds herself that she must choose something that reads as appropriately villainous, without compromising the dignity of the duchy. She acknowledges that a modest dress would likely suit Lady Avril better, but she immediately rejects that notion as contrary to her current objective. Chris, standing amidst the mannequins, remarks that he was instructed to send items home for Corina as well. He wanders toward a display and points out a bright red dress, suggesting with a casual air that Corina would likely love such a vibrant piece. He adds, with a hint of sharpness, that if Avril decides to buy that specific dress, he will have it sent to Lady Corina before Avril can even put her arms through the sleeves. Avril, observing the red dress, agrees that Corina would indeed like it. However, the shop staff interrupts, and Avril realizes the implications of Chris's statement. If she chooses the red dress, she won't even get the chance to try it on, rendering the purchase moot for her own needs. She pivots her attention, deciding to prioritize accessories. She declares that she will first find some flashy jewelry that a villainess would wear, leaving the final decision on the dress for later. The shop assistant obliges, guiding her toward the jewelry section. As the display case comes into view, Avril is struck by the blinding brilliance of the collection. The case is filled with necklaces, earrings, and brooches, all sparkling under the shop lights. The assistant explains that they carry both newer, trendier designs as well as vintage jewelry. She elaborates that the gemstones are purchased from other countries and then carefully cut and crafted by skilled artisans, making each piece one of a kind. Chris stands beside Avril, smiling pleasantly. He informs her that Lord Dylan has instructed him to buy anything the lady wants. He asks if she has found something she likes. Avril, however, is internally panicking. She stares at the display, noting the sheer luxury of the items. She attempts to maintain her haughty persona, telling herself that this level of opulence is exactly what she deserves as a woman who frequently receives gifts from men. She tries to convince herself that this must be a regular occurrence for Lady Avril. Yet, beneath the facade, she is trembling. She admits to herself that she thought she would be able to settle for something cheap. The reality of the situation hits her hard. There are no price tags on any of the items. She averts her gaze, unable to meet Chris's eyes, wishing she could look away from the dazzling but terrifying display. Her mind races with financial anxiety. She questions if it is normal for luxury goods to lack price tags. She reminds herself that she is a contract bride scheduled to leave the marriage in 3 years. She is in trouble. She desperately does not want to buy anything too expensive. She calculates the potential consequences, fearing that if she is later told the money she used will be deducted from her alimony, she won't be able to help Kira and the others back home. Forcing herself to take a deep breath, she resolves to think through the situation calmly. She begins to analyze the gems in the case with a discerning eye, recalling information she has read in books. She realizes she was previously so caught up in the beauty of the stones that she failed to notice their specific characteristics. Now, she scrutinizes them. She identifies a green stone with inclusions that shine like golden stars. She spots another stone with a distinctive ripple pattern. A third stone appears to change color from red to blue depending on the angle. Her internal encyclopedic knowledge tells her that these are gems found only in certain places, highly prized for their rarities. Some are precious stones that can no longer be obtained because the mines where they were found have closed. Avril deduces that she must choose the jewelry with the lowest value out of the available options. She decides to skip the most beautiful ones, assuming they are the most expensive. She scans the simpler necklaces, noting that several of them share the same chain design. Her eyes land on a particular piece, and she identifies the stone as a Padparatska sapphire. As she lifts it, a wave of recognition washes over her. The bright, deep orange color and the familiar design confirm it immediately. This is her grandmother's necklace. She holds it gently, thinking it is like a dream to find it again in a place like this. She sadly recalls that all of her mother and grandmother's belongings were sold long ago. The shop assistant notices her interest and asks if she likes it. The assistant launches into a sales pitch, explaining that the Padparatska sapphire used in the necklace is quite large and very valuable. She details that it was purchased at an auction almost a dozen years ago and remains in excellent condition. She emphasizes the exclusivity of the piece, stating there are only 2 vintage items currently in the shop, and this is one of them. Chris, observing Avril's hesitation, asks if she would like that one. Avril, despite her emotional connection to the heirloom, steels herself. She realizes that because it is a valuable, vintage item, it is definitely expensive. Consequently, it is not an option for her current budget-conscious strategy. She resigns herself to the loss, thinking it is a pity, but deciding she will be happy just to have been reunited with her grandmother's memento, even momentarily. She smiles a melancholy smile and declares she won't buy this one. She comforts herself with the thought that she has a very good memory and knows exactly how to find something more affordable. She makes up her mind and points to a different item in the case. She instructs the staff to send the bill to the Lancaster Duchy for the item she has selected. The shop assistant looks at the chosen item, a necklace with a small stone, and asks for confirmation. Avril confirms, yes, this one. She believes she has made the prudent choice. She reasons that although it is very beautiful, the design is simple compared to the other jewelry in the store. Furthermore, since she has never read about a gem like this in her books, she assumes it must be cheap. The shop assistant clasps her hands together and exclaims, as expected, you have very keen eyes. Avril's confidence wavers slightly as the assistant continues. The assistant reveals that the item Avril chose is the second vintage piece in the shop. In a crushing twist, the assistant announces that this is, in fact, the most expensive item in the entire store. She explains that the previous owner held onto it for a very long time, making it an extremely valuable, one-of-a-kind item. The reason Avril couldn't identify it is that even though the stone is small, it is so rare that it cannot even be found in the Encyclopedia of Gems and Minerals. Its absence from the market makes it even rarer. Avril stands frozen, her internal monologue screaming in disbelief that they had something like that in the store. Chris, oblivious to her internal financial horror, beams with a bright smile. He assures her that Lord Dillon will be more than happy to gift this to her. Avril stammers a weak no, but Chris continues, asking if there is a problem. He laughs lightly and says he is sure it will suit her. Then, capitalizing on the moment, he suggests they also buy the blue dress over there. Avril, defeated and paralyzed by the escalating cost, can only utter unintelligible sounds. A flashback reveals the context of the dress selection. In a previous moment, Avril had looked at a black dress but commented that she liked the red dress. However, Chris had interjected, noting that it wasn't very revealing or suitable. He questioned if she could really wear that red dress to the tea party, advising that it would be wise not to overdo it. He had steered her toward the blue dress instead. Back in the present, Avril stares at the blue dress, feeling that it is perfect for her but mourning the loss of her agency. She has a sinking feeling that the red dress will be gone before she ever gets a chance to wear it. As they leave, the weight of her failure crashes down on her. She gazes out at the city, tears streaming down her face. She laments that she should have just chosen her grandmother's necklace. Since she ended up buying the most expensive piece of jewelry anyway, her attempt at frugality was completely in vain. She berates herself, thinking that if she were really a bad girl, she would have just asked for another piece of jewelry without hesitation. She chides herself for being unable to even think to do something like that. Defeated, she wipes her tears, resigning herself to the fact that it can't be helped. Returning to the grand estate after an exhausting excursion into the capital, Lady Avril navigates the silent, opulent corridors of the Lanchester mansion. The physical toll of the day's shopping weighs heavily upon her, prompting a singular desire for the restorative embrace of a hot bath. She enters the bathing quarters, where the grand tub sits already filled with water, a testament to the diligence of the household staff. However, as she approaches the water, a tactile inspection reveals a disappointing reality. The water has lost its heat and sits cold within the basin. Avril contemplates the mechanics of the situation, hypothesizing that perhaps the boiler has malfunctioned or, more likely, the water temperature plummeted simply because she returned much later than anticipated. Rather than summoning a servant to rectify the issue, a luxury she feels unworthy of demanding, she resolves to visit the kitchens herself. Her mind reverts to the patterns of her previous life, where she was accustomed to manually adjusting the bathwater's temperature for her sister, Corina. She calculates that a few buckets of boiling water will suffice to restore the bath to an acceptable temperature. Moments later, the silence of the hallway is broken by the rhythmic sloshing of water. Avril trudges back toward her quarters, gripping the handle of a wooden bucket filled with steaming water. A maid, Grace Fisher, turns the corner and freezes in sheer horror at the sight of the Duchess-to-be performing manual labor. Grace stammers, her eyes widening as she processes the scene. The maid hastily explains that she had discovered the cold bathwater herself and had just gone to the kitchens to fetch hot water to replenish it. Avril, unfazed by the maid's distress, dismisses the concern, stating that it cannot be helped since she returned home so late. She attempts to maneuver past the servant, but Grace apologizes profusely and reaches out, insisting that she take care of the task immediately. Grace questions what in the world her mistress is doing carrying a heavy bucket. Avril tightens her grip on the handle, insisting that she can handle the weight and assuring the maid that it is perfectly fine. She notes internally that a different maid has been assigned to her rooms today. Grace, observing Avril's determination and physical capability, remarks that the lady is vastly different from the rumors that circulate about her. Avril ignores the commentary on her reputation, focusing instead on the physical sensation of the labor. She finds a strange comfort in the exertion, noting that moving her body has a calming effect. Her mind drifts to the contrast between her own habits and those of Corina, who never prepared her own baths. Suddenly, a commanding presence interrupts the domestic scene. Duke Dylan stands at the end of the corridor, his gaze fixed on the bucket in Avril's hand. He questions when exactly she acquired such a burden. His voice drops to a tone of bewildered authority as he demands to know why his wife-to-be is hauling a bucket of boiling water through his hallways. Avril, feeling small under his scrutiny, attempts to rationalize the situation by stating she is capable of carrying it. Dylan sharply counters that her physical strength is not the problem at hand. The Duke's attention snaps toward the maid, his expression darkening with fury. He demands to know what the maid brought along is doing and bellows at Grace Fisher to explain herself. Grace trembles violently, offering her sincerest apologies and scrambling to promise that she will refill the bathtub immediately. Dylan ignores the offer of the bath and drills into the core issue of neglect, asking who helped Avril dress that morning. Avril intervenes, answering the question simply. She states that she dressed herself and arranged her own hair, just as she does every morning. She admits she does not remember anyone ever helping her with these tasks. On the contrary, her role had always been to assist her mother and Corina with their outfits. Internally, she assesses the Duke's reaction, wondering if he believes the maids are neglecting her duties. She realizes that her independence might be construed as a failure of the household staff or, worse, that her appearance is unsatisfactory to him. Desperate to diffuse the tension and shift the Duke's focus away from the terrified maid and her own grooming habits, Avril executes a tactical subject change. She abruptly brings up the topic of her signing bonus. She reminds him of the agreement that she would receive payment merely for agreeing to the marriage. The sudden pivot in conversation catches Dylan off guard, disrupting his anger. Dylan blinks, processing the request, and agrees that her statement is true. He immediately reaches for his checkbook, offering to write her a check right at that moment. Avril breathes a sigh of internal relief, noting that she has successfully distracted him from the previous interrogation. Dylan, observing her priorities, murmurs about how she is exactly as he thought, interpreting her distraction as a unique quirk. He offers his apologies, admitting that he meant to prepare everything in advance, including the payment, but had fallen behind. He looks at her with a softened expression, remarking that she really is a very kind person. Avril flusters, stammering a denial and urging him not to mind her actions. She quickly steers the conversation back to the logistics of the money. She requests that, rather than receiving the check now, she would like to receive that money together with the alimony she is scheduled to collect when she leaves in 3 years. Dylan pauses, his pen hovering, and asks why she would prefer such a delay. Avril explains her reasoning with pragmatic clarity. She believes it is safest to keep the funds out of reach for the duration of the contract. Furthermore, she asks for a favor, to borrow the Duke's name in addition to using the money. She reveals that she has been formulating a plan since the moment she agreed to the marriage. She outlines her intention to hire the best and brightest graduates from the academy. She intends to send these capable individuals to Allingham County to manage affairs. She explains that her family is the type to spend liquid assets the moment they become available, therefore, sending cash would be futile. She asserts that the house and county will be in chaos for a while due to various circumstances, implying the need for external, competent management that her parents are unwilling to provide themselves. Dylan listens intently, understanding the nuance of her request. He realizes she plans to cover the expenses of this support staff while she lives at the duchy. He discerns that she aims to give her family something prepared and structural in advance, rather than money they would squander. Dylan accepts the proposal immediately. He tells her to leave the matter entirely to him. He assures her that he will arrange for the personnel right away, reminding her that he is, after all, her husband-to-be. Avril stares at him, stunned that he would look at her with such a cooperative and gentle expression, realizing for the first time the reality of having a husband. As the tension of the negotiation dissipates, Dylan circles back to the initial incident. He notes that she knew Grace's name just moments ago. He asks if she knows the full names of all the servants in the household. Avril admits that she does, or at least that she would like to learn them all. She explains simply that she thinks it is nice to know them. Dylan looks at her, utterly baffled by the contradiction between her rumored persona and the woman standing before him. He asks, with genuine confusion, what the hell she actually is. Avril smiles brightly, sparkles of innocence surrounding her, and delivers her self-assessment. She declares that since she is a villainess, she supposes she is an incompetent, wicked woman. She references the label used against her at her parents' house, where they called her incompetent. Dylan repeats the phrase, incompetent, wicked woman, staring at her in bewilderment, unable to reconcile the title with her actions. Inside the lavishly decorated drawing room of the Allingham residence, a tense conversation unfolds amidst the plush furniture and elegant drapery. Karina Allingham, dressed in a ruffled gown and holding a fan, sits with an air of immense entitlement, her posture stiff and expectant. She addresses her father, Count Allingham, with a sharp, demanding tone, confirming that 3 full days have passed since Avril departed for her marriage. Karina's frustration boils over as she questions whether the old pervert Duke simply forgot to hand over the promised payment, her face contorted with greed and impatience. She demands to know why the money has not yet been transferred, her hand gesturing emphatically to underscore her irritation regarding the delay. The Count, a portly man with a thick mustache and a fur-lined coat, sits opposite her, looking visibly anxious and sweaty as he clutches his hands together. He acknowledges her point but seems paralyzed by the situation, unable to provide a satisfactory answer to his demanding daughter. Karina presses him further, asking why he hasn't explicitly asked for the money yet, her voice rising with indignation. She insists that they should have sent Avril away only after securing the payment, criticizing their own lack of foresight in handling the transaction. The Count attempts to rationalize the delay, suggesting that Avril, being an absent-minded and lacking child, simply must not have asked for the funds yet. He wipes sweat from his brow, his nervousness palpable as he tries to maintain composure in front of his daughter. Just then, a servant presents a letter on a silver tray, interrupting their scheming. The Count informs Karina that he has actually received a missive addressed directly to her. Karina reacts with surprise, her eyes widening as she asks who the sender is. The Count reveals that the letter comes from Miss Alexandra of Count Lindbergh's family, the ex-fiancée of Karina's former playmate. Confusion clouds Karina's features as she takes the letter, unsure why such a person would be contacting her now. As Karina reads the contents, her expression shifts violently from confusion to absolute fury. She crumbles the paper in her hands, shouting, "What the hell is this?" as the insulting words sink in. The letter contains a humiliating offer. Alexandra writes that she would like to hire Karina Allingham as her personal maid. The absurdity of the suggestion sends Karina into a rage, but the Count, looking even more haggard and terrified, delivers worse news. He explains that Miss Alexandra seems to have deduced Karina's true identity. Despite Karina's claims that she had been impersonating Avril during her social interactions, the ruse has been exposed. Karina dismisses the exposure with arrogance, screaming that the offer is a joke and an unforgivable insult. She cannot fathom that an uptight woman like Alexandra would dare suggest making her a servant. However, the Count cuts through her tantrums with a harsh dose of reality. He ignores her indignation, stating bluntly that he does not care about her feelings because the family is in dire trouble. He reminds her of the substantial debts they owe to the Lindbergh family. The situation is critical. If Avril fails to send the money, the Allingham family faces financial ruin. The Count, desperate to salvage their standing, suggests that Corina should accept the work offer. He argues that if she works for Alexandra, they might be able to negotiate and resume their previous repayment plan to manage the debt. Corina vehemently rejects this, declaring that working for a woman like Alexandra is a joke and asserting that the debt is not her problem. She commands her father to go and set Count Lindbergh straight immediately, refusing to lower herself to the status of a maid. The Count's anxiety deepens as he reflects on the root cause of their financial desperation. He mutters that the amount of compensation requested was actually quite small initially. The urgent need for money arose only after Corina was caught playing with fire, a scandal that required immediate funds to cover up. He suspects that Alexandra's true goal in hiring Corina is not just to collect debt, but to destroy Corina's standing in the social world as revenge. Desperate for a solution that doesn't involve labor, Corina pivots back to the original plan. She urges her father to ask the duchy for the money immediately. She reasons that if the request comes to Avril, the girl will likely obediently send the money over without question. However, the Count reveals a significant flaw in this plan. He explains that most of Avril's signing bonus from the marriage contract will be automatically used to repay the original debt. They are effectively broke. The Count then drops another bombshell regarding the social dynamics at play. He reminds Corina that Alexandra broke off her engagement with Corina's playmate specifically because of Corina's dalliance with him. This personal vendetta fuels Alexandra's actions. But the Count has even more news, information that he warns might make Corina angry. Corina looks at him with skepticism, thinking he must be kidding. The Count reveals that Alexandra has recently become a candidate to be the fiancée of His Highness, the Crown Prince. Rumors are circulating that she is in a powerful position, making her an enemy they cannot afford to offend. Corina is stunned, but the bad news continues to pile up. The Count, sweating profusely, admits he has recently learned something else that completely upends their assumptions about Avril's marriage. Corina, overwhelmed, snaps back, asking if there is really more to this disaster. The Count explains that the old pervert duke they thought Avril was marrying has been replaced. The current Duke of Lancaster is not an old man at all. He is a young man of only 22 years. His name is Dylan Lancaster. Furthermore, this new duke is good friends with the Crown Prince, and there is talk that they may become even closer in the future. The visualization of Dylan Lancaster, young, handsome, and powerful, contrasts sharply with the old pervert image the Allinghams had mocked. Corina tries to process this, her face flushing with a mix of shock and jealousy. However, she quickly retreats into denial to protect her ego. She scoffs, asserting that there is no way a young, rich duke would ever cherish an incompetent girl like Avril. She insists that no one would treasure a kid like that, dismissing Avril as a nasty child. Corina forces a laugh, claiming there is no reason for her to get angry over something so impossible, convinced that Avril will be miserable regardless of the duke's age. Her mother, also present and equally haughty, agrees, laughing along with Corina and reinforcing the delusion that Avril is worthless. They mock the idea of Avril being on friendly terms with the Crown Prince, finding the notion hilarious and impossible. Meanwhile, the scene shifts drastically from the chaotic greed of the Allingham residents to the serene and sophisticated office of the Lancaster estate. Dylan Lancaster, the young duke, sits at a large wooden desk, reviewing documents. He is handsome, with light hair and a calm demeanor. His aide, Chris, stands nearby, reporting on his recent observations of the new Duchess, Avril. Chris, a young man with messy dark hair and a friendly smile, speaks with amusement. He asserts that Miss Avril is not a bad girl at all. He asks rhetorically if anyone actually believes the rumors that she is a villainess. Dylan listens intently as Chris recounts the events of their recent shopping trip to town. Chris describes the excursion in detail. He notes that when they first went dress shopping, Avril initially wanted to choose a revealing red dress. However, upon seeing the lack of price tags on the jewelry and realizing the high cost of the items, her demeanor changed instantly. She turned completely pale, her face going blue with shock at the extravagance. The flashback shows Avril staring at a large, teardrop-shaped gemstone necklace. Chris explains that she seemed to choose it randomly, but her luck was incredible because she ended up picking the single most expensive item in the store. The irony is not lost on Chris. Out of all the rare and valuable gems, the Villainess accidentally targeted the priciest one. However, instead of demanding it, she panicked. She realized the necklace she chose at random was too expensive. Back in the office, Chris continues his report. He mentions that when they returned from town earlier, Avril politely thanked him for accompanying her. This behavior contradicts her supposed villainous persona. Chris observes that she seems to want to act like a villainess, often forcing the conversation to take strange turns to appear bad. However, he notes that she has to physically push herself to do so. In reality, she appears quite gentle and polite, and Chris describes her as actually being a bit of an airhead. Dylan listens to this assessment with a contemplative expression. He asks Chris if he thinks so too, confirming that he has also noticed these contradictions in Avril's behavior. Dylan then shares his own observation, recalling an incident from some time ago. He came across Avril carrying heavy buckets of hot water meant for bathing. This manual labor is highly unusual for a noblewoman. Dylan wonders why she was doing such a task herself. Dylan speculates that perhaps the servants do not like her. He acknowledges that since Avril has a bad reputation, the household staff, who are otherwise hardworking and loyal, might have treated her rudely or coldly based on rumors alone. The image of the frail Avril lugging heavy buckets haunts him. He explains that this concern is exactly why he went to check on her personally. Despite their union being just a contract marriage, Dylan asserts that she is now his wife, and he intends to protect her for the next 3 years. Chris looks at his master with admiration, calling him kind. Dylan continues, recounting his conversation with Avril. When he asked her if she was being treated coldly by the staff, she forcibly changed the subject. Dylan interprets this deflection as an attempt to protect the maid who might have been neglecting her duties, showing a sincerity and kindness that belies her reputation. Furthermore, Dylan describes Avril's attempt to discuss money. She tried to appear greedy by asking about the funds promised to her. However, the attempt backfired and had the opposite effect on Dylan. He realized that Avril likely understands her family's dire financial situation perfectly well. He admits that the Lanchesters took advantage of Count Allingham's weakness to secure this engagement, adding a layer of guilt to his perspective. What struck Dylan most was Avril's specific request regarding the payment. She did not want the money sent directly to her parents' house. Instead, she asked to arrange what they needed herself. This nuance suggests she does not trust her parents or wants to control the flow of funds to ensure the debt is actually paid, rather than squandered. Dylan leans back, looking perplexed but intrigued. He remarks that she is not like any other lady he has ever met. She is strange and dense. Chris laughs, agreeing wholeheartedly. Chris then poses a provocative question. If that is the case, wouldn't Lady Avril be the ideal person to become the Duchess? Dylan considers this, admitting it might be true. He notes that she welcomed this contractual marriage with open arms, an attitude he finds unbelievable. As they speak, Avril sneezes somewhere in the distance, unaware she is the topic of such intense analysis. Chris continues his profile of her character. He argues that she is more like an innocent princess than a villainess. She seems to want to be a bad girl, but fails at every turn due to her inherent nature. Chris brings up one final observation from the shopping trip. He noted that Avril was obviously uninterested in dresses or jewelry in general. She moved through the store with detachment until she saw one specific vintage necklace. Upon spotting it, she became very enthusiastic. Dylan listens, interested in this spark of genuine desire. Chris notes that there was a piece of jewelry she was clearly interested in. Dylan asks the logical question, why didn't she get the first one she liked? Chris shrugs, looking confused himself. He explains that despite her enthusiasm for the vintage piece, she ended up buying something else entirely. God only knows. Chris exclaims, unable to decipher her logic. The chapter closes with Dylan deep in thought. He reflects on the contradictions. A girl pretending to be a villainess, uninterested in luxury yet forcing herself to act greedy, protecting servants who might mistreat her, and carrying her own bathwater. The more he hears about Avril, the more confused he becomes. He wonders why she is even trying to maintain this facade in the first place. The mystery of Avril's behavior leaves the young Duke bewildered, sitting in his office with more questions than answers about his new, strange wife. The interior of the ducal carriage sways gently as it traverses the cobblestone streets, carrying the newlywed couple toward their first public engagement. Avril Allingham sits stiffly on the plush, buttoned upholstery, her hands resting nervously in her lap. Her anxiety is palpable, a tight knot of tension that betrays her attempt to appear composed. Dylan Lanchester, seated opposite her with an air of relaxed elegance, breaks the silence by asking if she is nervous. Avril immediately denies it, her voice pitching slightly higher as she stammers that she is not at all anxious. However, her body language screams otherwise. She mechanically raises her hands to her face and squishes her own cheeks, kneading the soft skin in a subconscious effort to release the tension accumulating in her jaw. She confesses that she has never attended this kind of social gathering before. The weight of her new role presses down on her. She is supposed to attend this tea party today to help maintain the dignity of the ducal family. Yet, a darker, self-deprecating thought intrudes. She reasons that since she is supposed to be a villainess in the eyes of society, perhaps it is actually better if her manners are not perfect. A small, PFN, escapes Dylan as he suppresses a laugh at her internal logic. Dylan observes her eccentric behavior, the cheek squishing and the nervous rationalization, and remarks that she does not seem much like the Avril Allingham he has heard so much about. The rumors painted a picture of a wicked woman, yet the girl before him is jittery and endearing. Avril attempts to salvage her bad girl persona, claiming she usually only goes out at night because she is, in fact, a bad girl. She forces a bright, somewhat manic smile to sell the lie, but sweat drops roll down her temple, betraying her desperate performance. Dylan, seeing through the facade with effortless perception, offers her an out. He tells her gently that if she is not used to this sort of thing, there is no need to strain herself. He adds a cryptic comment about himself, stating that this social appearance is merely his way of putting on a fresh face more suitable for the daytime, suggesting that he, too, wears a mask for society. He asks her not to mind him, attempting to put her at ease. Avril stammers a denial, insisting it's not that she isn't used to it, but the reassurance seems to land. Attempting to change the subject to something concrete, Avril asks if it is true that the Crown Prince will be at the tea party today. Dylan is surprised she knows this and asks if Chris told her. Avril flushes, realizing she might have revealed too much of her information network, and awkwardly confirms it. Dylan affirms the prince's attendance and asks if there is something specific on her mind regarding the royal guest. Seizing the opportunity to gather intelligence, Avril requests to see the guest list for the tea party. She frames the request as a matter of curiosity, but her internal monologue reveals a desperate strategic need. She knows that her sister, Corina, previously attended many social gatherings impersonating her or using her name. Avril needs to identify anyone who might have met Corina to avoid them. The stakes are high. While a masquerade ball might hide a face, physical traits like hair and eyes cannot be easily concealed. Since she and Corina look so much alike, a direct encounter with someone who knows Corina's, Avril, could be disastrous. She rationalizes this precaution as necessary for her role, reminding herself that she is under contract to act as a duchess, even if she is an incompetent villainess. Dylan reviews the list and notes that there doesn't seem to be anyone concerning. He then circles back to her self-description, repeating her phrase, an incompetent villainess, with a thoughtful expression. He catches her off guard by stating that it sounds rather cute. Avril freezes, her eyes widening in genuine shock. She wonders internally if Lord Dylan is really the kind of man who would say such things, questioning the sincerity of the flirtation. Dylan, appearing earnest, clarifies that he only said it because it was genuinely what he was thinking, denying any calculated charm. Avril, flustered and unsure how to handle positive reinforcement, stammers a confused, "Thank you for the compliment?" The atmosphere in the carriage shifts, becoming lighter and almost floral in Avril's imagination. She thinks to herself that it feels like flowers are blooming inside the vehicle. She recalls that Grace, likely a maid back at the estate, also praised her recently. Dylan continues his praise, noting that the dress she is wearing today really suits her. Avril tries to ground herself, telling herself she knows it is just a compliment from a noble, likely empty words. She attempts to dismiss it as lip service from an employer to a superior or employee, trying to maintain her emotional distance. Despite her rationalizations, Avril's heart betrays her. She feels it soaring in her chest. She realizes with a pang of sadness that this is the first time she has ever been complimented like this. Her face flushes a deep red as she looks down at her hands, overwhelmed by the kindness. She reminds herself she has to act like a villainess, but the warmth of the moment makes it difficult. Her thoughts drift back to the shopping trip. She recalls thanking him after they went shopping. She notes with relief and surprise that he didn't mention the amount of money she spent, despite her fears. Dylan interrupts her reverie by pointing out the necklace she is wearing. He notes that the matching necklace is also good. Avril, startled, confirms it is the one she chose to go with her dress. Panic flares in her chest again. She assumes that because he is bringing up the jewelry now, he must have seen the bill and is about to reprimand her for the cost. She braces herself for a lecture on the price. Instead, Dylan delivers a line that leaves her breathless. He states that the value of the jewelry she wears is equal to her value as a woman. Avril tries to deny this extravagant sentiment, stammering, "No way, that's..." Dylan probes deeper, his gaze perceptive. He asks if there wasn't something she wanted even more than the necklace she is currently wearing. Avril freezes. She thinks of her grandmother's necklace, the vintage piece she had stared at so longingly in the shop. Dylan admits he chose the current necklace because he thought it would complement her, but he sensed her desire for the other one. He reminds her that their arrangement allows for this. "That's the kind of contract we have," he says, implying she should not deny her own wants. A knock on the carriage door signals their arrival at the venue. As the carriage comes to a halt, Avril's thoughts remain on the vintage necklace. She worries that her grandmother's necklace might have already been purchased by someone else. She feels she should just be thankful she had the chance to see it again, resigning herself to the fact that she cannot afford to buy it with the money she has on hand. She admits to herself that she has been thinking about it a lot since that day. Dylan extends his gloved hand toward her, offering support as they prepare to disembark. "Lady Avril," he calls softly. He instructs her to simply stay by his side and smile, assuring her that if she does so, she will be fine. He promises to introduce her as his fiancée, removing the burden of navigation from her shoulders so she doesn't have to worry. Avril takes his hand, thanking him quietly. Stepping out of the carriage, Avril is struck by the grandeur of the venue. It looks like a palace, far more beautiful than she had imagined. However, her awe is quickly replaced by social anxiety. As they walk toward the entrance, she feels the gaze of the onlookers. Paranoia whispers that they are laughing at her. She hears a "pff" from somewhere and flinches, feeling exposed. She stammers to Dylan, suggesting they head in, eager to get out of the open. Inside the garden venue, the atmosphere is buzzing with excitement. Guests whisper and squeal as they spot a high-profile arrival. Avril overhears comments about Lord Lawrence being beautiful. She spots him in the distance, His Highness, the Crown Prince. Avril steels herself, repeating her mantra that she only needs to act like a villainess in moderation. She scans the crowd, reassuring herself that there is nobody here who knows Corina. Her relief is shattered in an instant. Her eyes lock onto the figure standing next to the Crown Prince. It is a woman in a dark, elegant dress, radiating a sharp, intimidating aura. Avril's internal monologue screams, "No way," as recognition hits her like a physical blow. She identifies the woman as Miss Alexandra Lindbergh. Panic surges through her. Alexandra was not on the list, or at least Avril didn't see her name. She realizes this is the ex-fiancé of the gentleman Corina spent the night with, the very woman Corina wronged. Avril realizes the situation is spiraling toward disaster. This is so bad, she thinks. She recalls hearing that Alexandra was a candidate for the Crown Prince's fiancé, but she didn't expect to see her here today. She feels a sense of impending doom, thinking, I feel like this is going to be a bit of a mess. Dylan, oblivious to her internal panic, notices the prince and decides to make introductions. He turns to Avril and says, I'd like to introduce you to him today. He reveals a shocking piece of information. The Crown Prince, Lawrence Jason, is one of his closest friends. Avril whips her head around to look at Dylan, her face a mask of betrayal and shock. She mentally screams at Chris, the aide, for not mentioning this crucial detail, that the prince is Dylan's best friend. She feels blindsided. They approach the royal pair. The prince, Lawrence Jason, smiles charmingly. He wears a fur-lined coat over his suit and exudes royal charisma. He greets Avril saying, you must be, and trails off, seemingly about to say, Corina, or referencing the rumors. He mentions knowing that Corina begged her father to offer her hand in marriage to him. This confirms the prince knows about the Allingham family's desperate schemes. Avril quickly interrupts the potential misunderstanding, introducing herself with a stammer. My name is Avril Allingham, she declares, trying to establish her own identity distinct from her sister's notoriety. Lawrence accepts this smoothly, acknowledging her as his friend's wife-to-be. Then the woman beside him speaks. She has long, dark hair and sharp eyes that seem to pierce through Avril. She introduces herself with a cool, dangerous smile. My name is Alexandra Lindbergh. Avril forces a smile, sweating profusely, and replies, I see. Internally, she is screaming, terrified by the bad feeling settling in her stomach. Alexandra doesn't let the moment pass with pleasantries. She turns to the prince and asks, Your Excellency, may I borrow this young lady for a moment? She stares directly at Avril, her smile not reaching her eyes, and states ominously, I think the two of us have much to discuss. Avril is frozen. In a small, frantic thought bubble, she wonders about her performance. She thinks, I tried to do a little accent to deceive you, but did that really work? This doesn't make any sense. She fears her attempt to differentiate herself from Corina through her voice or mannerisms has failed completely. Alexandra leans in closer, dropping the formalities. She addresses Avril with a piercing question that hangs in the air like a threat. Lady Avril Allingham? Don't you think so? The question implies she knows more than she is letting on, perhaps seeing right through the identity confusion, or worse, mistaking Avril for Corina despite the introduction. The instated Duchess sits at the grand table, her face radiating pure, unadulterated delight as she holds a piece of bread that is unmistakably charred. She exclaims that the bread is delicious, her eyes sparkling with a sincerity that unnerves the attending servants. The bread in question is not merely toasted, it is blackened, a culinary mistake that would typically be discarded before ever leaving the kitchen. Yet, Avril praises it, noting with genuine appreciation that it is perfectly aged and burnt, as if describing a fine wine rather than overcooked dough. The head chef and the maids exchange glances of sheer panic, their professional pride wounded by the accidental service of such subpar food. One staff member, unable to bear the sight of the Duchess eating what amounts to kitchen scraps, steps forward to intervene. He stammeringly insists that he will have the dish remade immediately, his hands reaching out to confiscate the offending item. Avril, however, recoils defensively, clutching the burnt crust as if it were a rare treasure. She refuses the offer, insisting that it looks tasty and complimenting the chef on a job well done. The confusion deepens as the main course is inspected. The omelette, much like the bread, is significantly more burnt than usual, its surface marred by dark, crispy patches. The staff watches in stunned silence as Avril digs in, flinching only slightly when she realizes they are watching her with such intensity. She misunderstands their horror for hunger, innocently offering to let them eat the burnt omelette instead, assuming that perhaps they are eyeing it for themselves. This display of humility, or perhaps a history of being fed leftovers, leaves the staff paralyzed, unsure how to handle a mistress who treats kitchen failures as gourmet treats. From the shadows of the hallway, Chris, the Duke's trusted aide, observes this peculiar interaction with a notebook in hand. He scribbles furiously, documenting the event as part of his ongoing report. He chuckles to himself, munching on a snack, and notes that it is far too soon for the staff to understand the unique palate of their new mistress. His observations shift as the scene changes to a corridor bathed in sunlight, where Avril is found pacing back and forth with a small box clutched tightly in her hands. Grace, a maid dressed in the elegant navy blue uniform of the Lancaster house, distinguished by its frills and tailored silhouette, watches Avril with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Unlike the stiff, dark green and utilitarian uniforms of the Allingham household, Grace's attire allows for movement and grace, fitting for a house that values its staff. Grace approaches the pacing Duchess, asking what on earth she is doing. Avril turns, startled, and reveals the source of her anxiety. She explains that Lord Dillon bought her a piece of jewelry, her voice trembling slightly at the weight of the gift. Grace, puzzled, asks if the Duchess does not already possess jewelry. Avril's expression softens into a sad, self-deprecating smile as she admits that this gift is the only jewelry she owns. Because she has never owned anything of value before, she has no idea where to put it. The fear of losing such a precious item has driven her to pace the halls, desperately looking for the best place to store it so that it remains safe. Grace, attempting to be helpful, suggests that she check with the Duke and perhaps call for a jeweler to arrange proper storage or a safe. This suggestion triggers an immediate panic in Avril. She shouts, "Don't do that," with a force that startles the maid. Realizing her outburst, Avril stammers, oscillating between yes and no, terrified of causing trouble or drawing attention to her poverty. Grace watches this internal struggle, her reserve melting away into a gentle fondness. Chris, still observing from a distance, notes this shift. He recalls that Grace was previously reserved and cautious regarding the new Duchess, but now she engages with a warmth that suggests Avril has won her over. Grace reassures Avril that she doesn't need to go to such trouble, her posture relaxing as she realizes the Villainess is merely a frightened girl. Later, inside the Duke's private office, the atmosphere is heavy with the scent of old paper and ink. Dillon Lancaster sits at his desk, his expression unreadable as he processes the information Chris has just delivered. Chris stands before him, presenting the report on Avril Allingham, with a professional demeanor that barely conceals his amusement. Dillon questions the content of the report, his brow furrowing as he tries to reconcile the details with his expectations. Chris recounts the events of the day, explaining that Lady Avril was observed eating burnt food with joy and panic pacing over a single gift. Dillon listens, his stoic mask slipping slightly as he struggles to comprehend the absurdity of it all. Chris suggests that Dillon should go and assess the situation for himself the next time, arguing that it would be worth the hassle to witness these eccentricities firsthand. Dillon initially feigns disinterest, claiming he would rather not get too involved, maintaining the aloof persona he has cultivated. However, Chris presses the issue, teasing his master by asking if he hasn't been enjoying these reports, even just a little bit. Dillon's resolve crumbles under the playful interrogation. He sighs, resigning himself to the curiosity that has taken root, and agrees to go and assess the situation tomorrow. Chris beams, declaring that seeing is believing, satisfied that he has successfully engaged the Duke's interest in his new wife. As Chris leaves the office, his thoughts turn inward. He reflects on the irony of the situation. The rumors spoke of a truly terrible villainess marrying into the Lancaster Duchy, a woman to be feared and managed. Yet, the reality is starkly different. Dillon, recalling the reports and his own interactions, mutters to himself that she is a very cute villainess, though, a rare admission of affection that marks a significant shift in his perspective. Chris observes that ever since Lady Avril arrived, Lord Dillon has begun to change, shedding his isolation bit by bit. The scene shifts briefly to a moment of levity, showing Avril's eyes widening in pure sparkle and awe as she is presented with a tiered tray of snacks, gasping, "Those?" in disbelief at the luxury of simple pastries. Closing his notebook, Chris walks down the hallway with a light heart. He admits to himself that he had deeply worried Lord Dylan would spend the rest of his life alone, isolated by his station and his guarded nature. When Dylan decided on a contract marriage, Chris feared the worst. But now, seeing the faint smile on his master's face and the warmth returning to the household, Chris realizes he no longer has to worry about that at all. The Villainess has not destroyed the house. She has breathed life back into it, one burnt omelette at a time. The opulent setting of a high society gathering, where the air shimmers with the weight of expectation and social stratification. Entering this domain is Miss Alexandra Lindbergh, a figure of striking elegance and intellectual renown, recognized immediately as the genius woman, who had recently graduated from the academy with high honors. Her presence commands attention, her silhouette framed by the grandeur of the room, yet her focus locks onto a specific target. Standing opposite her is the protagonist, currently assuming the identity of Avril but internally retaining the memories and personality of Karina. She recognizes Alexandra instantly, recalling her reputation as a beauty and a scholar, noting that the woman before her is 20 years old, 2 years her senior. The tension creates a palpable silence until Alexandra breaks it with a pointed, probing question. She asks if the young lady knows of a private tutor named Hannah. The mention of this name triggers a jolt of recognition in the protagonist, confirming the specificity of Alexandra's inquiry. Memories flood back, painting a picture of the past where Hannah served as a governess and private tutor to Karina. Hannah had been a figure of kindness and intellect, teaching the young Karina many things in secret and sympathizing with her difficult familial situation. However, this period of enlightenment ended abruptly and harshly. When Karina's mother discovered the secret tutelage, Hannah was summarily fired. Following her dismissal, Hannah found employment at Count Lindbergh's house, where she was put in charge of educating Miss Alexandra. Rumors suggested that after leaving the Lindbergh service, Hannah had married and moved far away. Alexandra presses on, her demeanor shifting from inquiry to accusation. She confronts the protagonist, believing her to be the bad girl who tormented Hannah's former charge. The protagonist, committed to her role as a villainess, faces a binary choice in how to respond. She could explain the misunderstanding, or she could lean into the persona of a wicked woman. Her internal monologue reveals a chaotic struggle. Option 1 involves being scolded for messing with an ex-fiancé, while option 2 involves revealing her identity as a substitute and being cast out of the Duke's house penniless. Faced with these grim alternatives, she rationalizes that being scolded is the lesser evil. Alexandra reveals that Hannah used to speak of her teaching days, mentioning that she was highly regarded for her intelligence. However, Hannah also spoke of a gifted young lady she once taught, a student who possessed natural brilliance. This revelation strikes a chord in Alexandra. She admits that she always assumed this other student must be even more exceptional than herself, creating a complex of inferiority and curiosity regarding the girl Hannah praised so highly. Determined to test the mettle of the woman before her, Alexandra challenges her to recite poetry. She explains that in high society, a person's ability in poetry recitation is directly linked to the breadth and quality of their upbringing, often used as a competitive metric among families. It is a quintessential hobby for a lady, practiced at tea parties to demonstrate refinement. Alexandra invites her to recite anything, even a favorite poem, to prove her worth. Internally, the protagonist panics. As Karina, she was never skilled at reading poetry from books, let alone reciting them from memory. She attempts to deflect, stating it is impossible, but Alexandra presses, feigning disappointment with a sharp, challenging smile. Resigning herself to humiliation, the protagonist decides to get the mockery over with quickly. She admits she hasn't memorized any standard pieces, but as she scrambles for words, a fragment of memory surfaces. She begins to speak, reciting a verse that starts with the sun going down in the evening. As the words flow, she describes leaves set aglow in the crimson setting sun and the feeling of nostalgia holding one captive. The poem speaks of waiting for something that will never return, the darkness of night hiding homesick tears, and the scent of osmanthus lingering in memories as one waits for the morning. Alexandra listens, entranced. She identifies the piece immediately as a niche poem, one not widely known or practiced in their social circles. Her demeanor shifts from skepticism to genuine delight and surprise that the woman before her knows such an obscure work. The protagonist, observing this reaction, realizes she has accidentally impressed the genius rather than failing the test. Flustered by the unexpected success, the protagonist explains she was using classical language and had merely blurted out a line from her favorite poem without thinking. Alexandra compliments her pronunciation, calling it great, and notes that she, too, spoke without thinking, revealing a shared passion for the art form. Attempting to salvage her villainous persona and ruin the mood, the protagonist pivots to a discussion about her ex-fiancé. She disparages him, calling him an unwise person who went looking for a lover at a masquerade ball in a rural town. She describes how he fell in love with a bad girl with a reputation, leading her to break off the engagement. She frames this narrative to paint herself as a woman scorned who made a cold, calculated decision. However, Alexandra misinterprets this entirely. Instead of seeing a bitter woman, she sees a talented strategist who cut off dead weight. She praises Lady Alexandra, referring to the protagonist's guise, as a genius for her decisive action. The protagonist tries to correct this, insisting she wants to be insulted, but her words fail to reach the intended mark. The conversation turns to the label of villainess. Alexandra questions why people keep attaching that stigma to her. She reveals that the rumors of her being a villainess caused her to become engaged to His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, a situation she finds rather annoying. As she speaks, Alexandra's frustration manifests physically. She grips an apple sitting on the table, her hand trembling with suppressed rage. With a sudden, violent motion, she crushes the fruit, pulverizing it with a single fist until juice sprays outward, a shocking display of raw power from the refined genius. Alexandra confesses that she has been ostracized for her abilities since she was a child. In a manner of speaking, the gifted girl Hannah spoke of became her driving force, a rival she constructed in her mind. She went to the academy despite her father's opposition, solely because she believed that girl would attend as well. Her disappointment boils over as she recounts finding out that the young woman she admired from afar had turned out to be a bad girl, with an infamous reputation. Her anger intensifies as she questions who spread the rumors labeling the girl a villainess and who prevented her from receiving a proper education. Alexandra's eyes narrow with dangerous intent as she declares she will tear the person responsible for ruining that girl's potential to shreds. Recognizing the intensity of Alexandra's feelings, the protagonist realizes the game is up. She acknowledges that Alexandra knows who she truly is. Alexandra confirms this, stating plainly that she came to the party specifically to meet her. She reminds the protagonist that disclosing anything about the contract marriage would be a breach of confidentiality, but she questions why the protagonist insists on pretending to be a villainess. Even if she was forced to marry in her sister's stead, Alexandra argues, there is no need to adopt such a wicked persona. The protagonist, however, stands firm. She declares that she truly wants to be a villainess from the bottom of her heart. She explains that since the Duke proposed to Avril Allingham, the villainess, she feels an obligation to live up to those expectations. Her ambition, she claims, is to hold the Duke's heart firmly in her hands. Alexandra is baffled by this logic, calling it weird, really weird. She questions if Dylan Lancaster's taste in women is truly that odd, to which the protagonist affirms that it absolutely is. The protagonist elaborates that no family of decent standing could produce such an unusual villainess, suggesting this is why the Duke kept turning down other marriage proposals. He was specifically looking for a wicked woman. Therefore, to fulfill her half of the contract, she decided to become the perfect villainess for him. Processing this twisted romantic logic, Alexandra finally relents. She asks the protagonist to confirm that she is, in fact, not actually a wicked woman. When the protagonist asks her to keep this secret, Alexandra agrees, though she remains skeptical about whether being wicked is desirable in the first place. Ultimately, she decides that as long as the protagonist is fine with it, she will support her. The tension dissolves into a warm camaraderie. Alexandra offers her full support, encouraging the protagonist to do her best to become a splendid villainess. The protagonist thanks her profusely, and they bond over their shared secret. As they prepare to return to the party, the protagonist reflects that despite Alexandra's public image as a cold genius, she is actually a very nice person. The only casualty of their meeting is the crushed apple left amidst the debris on the table. Returning to the garden tea party, they rejoin the men. Lord Dylan Lancaster and his companion, Prince Lawrence, are waiting at a table laden with tea and desserts. The protagonist approaches Dylan, announcing that there were no problems at all, signaling the end of her private conversation with Alexandra. Dylan observes that she seems to have finished her talk, while the protagonist internally celebrates surviving the encounter without incident. Alexandra, playing along with the new dynamic, tells Dylan that his fiancée is a very interesting person. She adds a mischievous comment that she also learned quite a bit about the beautiful Duke's taste in women, causing Dylan to spit out his tea in shock. Alexandra laughs, remarking that she can't imagine ever being bored if she were to become friends with such a woman. The protagonist, relieved that Alexandra is on her side, now faces a new dilemma: how to end the tea party peacefully while still maintaining her villainous persona. She recalls that behaving herself and going home quietly wouldn't leave the impression of being a wicked woman. She decides she must cause a little trouble before departing. Drawing upon rumors of villainesses who flirt with other women's fiancés or make people cry, she attempts to formulate a plan. She turns to Alexandra's companion, Prince Lawrence, and suggests that she share her impressions of Lord Dylan thus far, claiming she has been trying to ask Dylan about himself but he hasn't been forthcoming. Seeing this as her chance to be annoying, she begins to speak about Dylan. However, her attempt to be wicked immediately backfires. Instead of insults, she launches into a stream of glowing praise. She tells Lawrence that Dylan is a very kind person, despite pretending to be cold. She tries to frame this as talking without reading the room to be annoying, but the content of her speech is purely complimentary. She lists his virtues. He doesn't use money to solve problems or offload work to others. He trusts her to go shopping without him, and he has memorized the full names of all the servants, knowing the details of their work. She calls him an ideal master. She continues, breathless with admiration, recounting how he went out of his way to talk to her in person despite being busy, and how he personally gave her advice regarding her family issues. She describes how he worries about her because she came from far away, ordering maids to prepare meals according to her taste and preparing a separate room for her in her own villa. The protagonist's complaints are nothing more than a testament to his character. She mentions being bothered only by how busy and pale he looks, showing her concern. She even recalls him holding a bucket for her, an act she found impressive, revealing his inner beauty shining from within. Finally, she concludes by stating the obvious. As everyone knows, he is also quite dazzlingly handsome. She declares without a doubt that he is the nicest person she has ever met. By the end of this monologue, Dylan is covering his face with his hand, utterly mortified and blushing furiously. He begs her to stop, asking for a break. Alexandra laughs heartily, finding the situation hysterical and confirming that Lady Avril is indeed quite interesting and adorable. Prince Lawrence, amused, remarks that he didn't realize Dylan was the passionate type and that he is learning so much. The protagonist, confused by their reactions, wonders if she said something wrong. She had intended to be the center of attention in a negative way, similar to how Karina hated not being the center of attention in the past, but instead, she has simply charmed everyone and embarrassed her fiancé with praise. Prince Lawrence encourages her to chat some more, enjoying the spectacle, while the protagonist internally screams for someone to tell her what she did wrong. In a concluding scene, the protagonist is shown weeding a garden, musing that since it is a holiday in Japan, she thought she would do some weeding, further highlighting her disconnect from the typical, villainous, behavior she strives to emulate.